Dang it, this game's so friggin' hard. That's it, I'm looking it up on the internet. But wait a minute, it's 1993 and I'm only 6 years old. The internet doesn't exist yet. I mean, not really. I mean, it has technically existed ever since 1969 if you're gonna be a dick about it, but that's not gonna help me out now. But then again, this guy Todd from Circuit City told me that someday the internet and gaming are gonna go together like bread and butter, so I guess the only way to find out is for us to just sit here for as long as it takes to find out for sure. But then again, I only have about 3 years left to tape, so I'm gonna go ahead and stop it and start recording again in 30 years. Alright, after 30 years, I'm finally back to tell you that that fateful day where the internet joined forces with the gaming world finally did come, and it's never been the same ever since. But even though most of the changes are absolutely amazing, to be honest, some of them do kinda suck. So with little to no further ado, I present to you the pros and cons of the internet and gaming. Okay, so when it comes to gaming before the internet, there's really two different eras to talk about. One's the era before you could connect your actual games to the internet and play with or against other humans, and the other's the era even further back than that before you could even go online to enhance your games in other ways, whether it be through walkthroughs, cheats, news, and all that. Before I leave an upper decker in the comments, though, don't worry, I'm not about to be one of those weirdos who swears whatever era I happen to grow up in is automatically the best thing ever, cause at the risk of ruining my retention time, I totally think that the pros of the internet and gaming outweigh the cons, and in general, I feel like games are way more fun now than ever before, all things considered. However, I do feel like there are a few cons of the internet and gaming that nobody ever talks about, let alone notices, that I do feel are important. I mean, while I can't in good conscience defend games like Bubsy or Wayne's World, there was just something nice about buying or renting a game and having no other choice but to play the hell out of it without having the option to turn it off and watch Time Cop on one of like 6 different streaming services. Hell, even for good games, it's hard to not inevitably check your phone whenever you finish a stage or get to a checkpoint, when sure, you could have some self-control, but that's not a real thing, you dingus. But even if it were, I think not even having the option of getting sidetracked with the internet or watching just about any movie or TV show ever made within seconds at any given time really helps with the immersion of a game. Whether or not a game's good or bad, we all get stuck from time to time, either on a puzzle you just can't figure out, or parts of the gameplay that are really difficult. These days, it's no big deal, though. You can just look anything up on the internet in like 2 seconds, even if it's a game that just came out like 5 minutes ago somehow. But before the internet, you either had to buy a strategy guide at Funcoland or Software Etc., which a lot of games were dickishly designed around getting you to do, or if you weren't gonna do that for whatever reason, you just kinda had to spend your entire weekend toughing it out. Sure, the temper tantrums and flying fecal matter may have led to a few wellness checks from the police, but finally figuring something out or getting past a hard part of a game with no help or alternative means of entertainment is honestly one of the most rewarding feelings you could ever get out of life. Well, you know, except for committing perjury to impress your new crush. Your Honor, I can assure you that my pee-pee is not small. These days, I'll never look anything up when I'm stuck, because even the hardest games will always nudge you in the right direction, and I'm not even saying that, along with having the option to look things up, isn't just better all around. I'm just saying that one thing you do lose in the trade-offs is solitude of being cut off from the rest of the world and character building that comes with being thrown to the wolves. But with there being so many games before the internet that had all kinds of cryptic nonsense, it was kind of hard to avoid them, and before you could just look reviews up at games from your favorite YouTubers, all you really had to go off of was the freaking box art. Well, you know, that and word of mouth anyway. Yeah, you could have read gaming magazines too, I suppose, but I never really found the reviews to be all that reliable, given that most publications either made the games themselves, or were probably paid by the people who did to tell you to buy them. So your best option was to usually just pick the coolest looking cover and hope for the best. Sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't, but more often than not, it really just came down to luck, and how anybody decided to give Mega Man 1 a chance, I have no idea. Although being trapped with a bad game and no internet can sometimes result in you overlooking some flaws and falling in love with some hot garbage. Seeing how gaming magazines were rarely brutally honest in their reviews, most of the games that you'd actually end up playing were complete gambles. These days, though, developers can't really get away with bad games nearly as easily as they used to. Although with online stores being a thing and user scores being hidden from the Switch for some reason, it's actually easier than ever to buy something horrible if you don't look it up beforehand, given that like 85% of indie games are pretty low effort. But even so, though, the other 15% of indie games can be outstandingly fun and creative. Plus, even if you do step on a landmine in the vast field of online games, you're usually only down a couple of bucks as opposed to like $95 for WWF Raw in the 90s. And that's before inflation, so again, this is another area where gaming post-internet reigns nacho supreme. This is why when you're choosing games based off of cover art, your best bet was to rent them for $5 as opposed to buying them for $50, $60, or $70. But regardless of whether a game was good or bad, you'd usually make sure to play the hell out of them while you could, which led to developing Stockholm Syndrome for games like Yonoid and McKids.
They're really not that bad once you get to know them.
I remember renting the Mario Bros. Arcade game for the NES when I was like 5 years old, having never seen it before. And I know this is gonna sound weird, but something about playing it in a quiet basement scared me to the point where I had trouble sleeping afterwards. I knew it was a real Nintendo game, but I felt like I saw something I wasn't supposed to. It's really hard to explain why I felt the way I did, but I never forgot about it. Probably didn't help that I was home alone either. I'd have probably just given up and did something else if I had the option to, but since this was the game that I rented that weekend, I just kinda kept trucking along and overthinking the hell out of what my brain was attempting to process, and it's not like I could've just looked it up and spoiled the mystery. Nah, I just kinda had to lay there all night wondering what the hell I just played and stew on it for a couple of decades. Then there was another time where the exact opposite happened, where I played the Super Mario Bros. NES game on an actual arcade cabinet in Florida when I was on vacation, and I went decades not knowing what the hell that was all about. I remember telling so many people about this over the years, which obviously nobody cared, but the few kids who didn't believe me, which led me to thinking I had a false memory or something. I had access to the internet though, I could've just looked it up and rubbed all the naysayers' noses in it, but nope, people just chucked my eyewitness account as another rumor along the same lines of the one about Marilyn Manson having his rib cage removed so he could bite his own Peter. And also, this might just be me, but I usually had no idea what games were actually coming out back in the day. Sometimes I'd have a heads up from the rare occasions where I'd actually look at a gaming magazine, but usually I'd just see games as they came out in stores. You can still drop games to watch TV, VHS, or even DVDs, but before on-demand and streaming, you couldn't choose when you wanted to watch things. The networks would pretty much make your schedule for you with way fewer channels, and for some reason, there was some kind of a law that forced TV companies to only play the dustiest movies and TV shows possible during the daytime.
Oh wow, back-to-back airings of You've Got Mail? Thanks, Comedy Central. Now I gotta open my brand new copy up.
Like, yeah, watching movies was fun, but you could only wear your Billy Madison and Beverly Hills Cop tapes out for so long before you kind of wanted to do something else. Even if you rented a movie you'd never seen before, it'd be over in like 2 hours, and then what? Well, going outside sure led to some adventures, like those times where this weirdo would buy my socks off my feet for $20, but even that got old after he offered me $300 to get into his car so he could take naughty pictures of me at his place, so when all else fails, video games would always pick up the slack. Again, even though the internet giving you unlimited options of what to do does outweigh the cons, sometimes I do miss the only option being to purely immerse yourself into a game without the temptations of doing like a million other things creep into the back of your mind, which is probably why I actually really like long flights. And oh yeah, there are also these things called instruction manuals that give you a little more info, like backstories that you could read on the ride home from Circuit City to get you a little more revved up for the adventure you were about to embark on. Back then, most games didn't have cutscenes, so they relied on these manuals to tell you pretty much everything. If you just popped a game in and tried to play it cold, you'd usually just get thrown right into things with no idea what was going on, but if you had the manual, you'd know exactly what you were doing, who you were killing, why you were killing them, and everything else. To be fair though, games back then really weren't that complicated, with there being way fewer buttons and graphical limitations and all that, so I'm not about to duke on modern tutorials since it's honestly kinda necessary most of the time given how complex games are these days. But still though, manuals really weren't needed, even if we honestly don't need them anymore. Even when they weren't even necessary, like when stories were being told within the games themselves, looking at these things are just their own standalone experience, even to this day. Because whoever made these things usually put a lot of work and thought into them. It wasn't like the digital manuals games have today, where they're just kind of bare-ass basic explanations of everything. I guess you could argue that it wasn't necessarily the internet that killed manuals as much as it was the fact that manuals could just be in the games themselves, and yeah, that may be right, but I have a feeling in my ass it tells me that we'd still probably have instruction manuals if the internet never came creeping out of the cut. But even if modern in-game tutorials somehow fail you and you can't afford brain surgery, you could still always look things up on the internet to see step-by-step processes of exactly what you're supposed to do for free, as opposed to buying hint books or paying for an expensive-ass hotline for some jabroni to tell you exactly what to do. I never even considered calling one of these hotlines myself, mainly because I didn't want to get my ass whooped. Not that my parents abused me or anything, but I'm sure they would have if I did something this stupid. But even though I never called them, I do wish we had more of these recordings available on the internet now, because I'm sure most of them were hilarious.
Hey, is this 1-800-Nintendo? You know, it doesn't matter. Do you know any Super Nintendo games that have nudity in them? No, Donkey Kong Country doesn't count. He's wearing a tie.
Another aspect of gaming before the internet, though, was the fact that whatever game you'd actually get on a cartridge was usually the final version of the game there'd ever be. Got glitches that need to be fixed with a massive day one patch? Too bad, dingus, those were part of the game's permanent record. Seriously, even officially licensed ROMs of older games usually keep all the glitches more often than not because the developer's lazy, which I'm sure they are, but because there's a lot of people out there, including myself, that believe that the glitches are a part of the fun. For better or worse, they were just kind of part of the experience in video games, and communities have embraced them for decades, especially the speedrunning community.
The gay community.
No, AJ Styles, the speedrunning community. God. Yeah, I know that games are way more complicated now, so it's a lot easier for mistakes to slip through the cracks, even with a lot more people working on them. But even though patches are an improvement to the industry, I think that most developers use this as a crutch, and I hate how widely accepted it's become for developers to release unfinished games with massive day one patches just to meet deadlines. Remember that famous Miyamoto quote where he says that a delayed game can be fixed, but a bad game's bad forever? Well, apparently some developers never heard this quote. Not gonna name names, but let's just say that it rhymes with Game Freak.
Yeah, my rap career peaked like 20 years ago.
Most people point to developers abusing the option of having massive day one patches for games as an excuse to just go all digital, and I'm not about to open up that can of worms here, but this isn't how it's supposed to be. I know most people, including myself, stream just about everything when it comes to movies and TV shows, but nobody who actually buys Blu-rays or DVDs would ever accept downloading massive day one updates in order for the green screen parts of Spider-Man to be fully edited, so why is it perfectly okay to release an unfinished video game? If I were the ultimate ruler of the world, I'd make it mandatory that games not be sent out for mass production unless they're 100% complete. Minor patches to fix things like the menu in Mario Kart 8 not starting off on the race option are fine, especially since, as I said, games are way more complicated these days, but I'm tired of developers not even sending review copies out because they're trying to finish their projects in homeroom before they're graded on them. Sometimes in the 64 days, it fixed glitches with entirely new cartridges, like the Grey Ocarina of Time cartridge not having as many glitches, or when Turok 3 had a glitch that made it impossible to beat the game in multiplayer mode, with the only solution being to send your copy back and get a new one, which I'm pretty sure makes this the rarest 64 game to date. So I mean, I'm definitely not saying that games shouldn't have patches, and I'm willing to overlook honest mistakes here and there, but like, if the game wasn't playable right out of the shrink wrap with zero internet connection, then I think it's, well, I hate to say this on a children's program, but quite frankly, it's poopy. Seeing glitches used to be a fun quirk that garner hearty laughs, but usually not something that ruin an entire game like the boring glitches we see today. Hell, sometimes it even takes skill to trigger the glitches in the first place, like with the Mew glitch in Pokemon's Red, Blue, and Yellow. Move over, self-help coaches, knowing this trick's all you need to get laid. If you really wanted to rock your game to the core, though, then you could always use Game Genies, Game Sharks, or Action Replays to cheat to your heart's content, and it's not like we don't have cheat codes anymore, but with all the hand-holding and constant checkpoints, there's really no need for them. I mean, the whole draw to cheating in the first place was they could finally beat some of these games after days, months, or even years of being tortured by them, so you felt like you had some kind of revenge. Like, if you can't beat most of the games that come out today with all the extra help, then there's probably something wrong with you. Don't get me wrong, I'm not a big enough snob to act like there's anything wrong with playing games on easy mode and using all the hints in the world as long as you're having fun, but to cheat on top of that, it's like being given a weapon to fight an 8-year-old who's already in a coma. Honestly, on their own, I think games are actually way harder now than they ever were before, but they're usually way more reasonable than ever too, since checkpoints usually don't send you back any further than like 5 minutes and you have unlimited lives, as opposed to the old days where you'd have to start all the way over from the beginning if you died like 3 times with all kinds of cheap tricks and traps that you couldn't possibly react to in time if you hadn't already played the game before. If you don't believe me, then go ahead and try beating Celeste with 3 lives and 2 continues and get back to me. But even if older games weren't actually harder most of the time, they sure did feel like it, and they also pissed you off a lot more without there being save states or anything like that back then, so getting revenge via cheating friggin' ruled. Even if you didn't use Game Genies though, finding out about cheat codes built into the games wasn't as easy as a quick Google search either. The only ways to actually find out about cheat codes back then would be from buying hint books, or, you know, usually by just writing the codes down in the magazine aisle while your mom was buying Elio's pizzas. Yeah, there was also word of mouth, but that was about as reliable as a used condom from a porcupine. I probably shouldn't even admit to this, but one time I talked to an NPC in the Celadon department store in Pokemon Blue 255 times because this kid Kevin told me that it'd trigger a random encounter with Pika-Blue. I don't remember exactly what it was, but he told me there was something else I was supposed to do right after talking for the 255th time, so I actually tried it again after it obviously didn't work because I thought I might have miscounted. In my defense, I was skeptical that this would work in the first place, but I had no way of knowing otherwise, so I had to at least try. I mean, sure, it sounds crazy, but so does the real Mew glitch. To be fair to good old Kevin, I don't even think he was trying to trick me. I actually believe that somebody tricked him, but he wasn't a big enough geek to actually try it himself, and therefore couldn't warn me about it. At worst, I think he just made me his guinea pig. Had the internet actually been reliable and easily accessible, though, I could have just looked it up and realized immediately this was just a load of bull milk, and even if I couldn't use the internet to find that info, I would have at least been more intrigued to watch a TV show or something else. Again, I know AOL existed at the time, so there was an internet, but I mean, even in 2006 when I got Twilight Princess, I was trying my ass off trying to find out how to fish, because I saw those E3 demos where they were fishing with the motion controls, so I was just waiting for a fish to bite while I was staring at my TV, laying on my bed, dying for something to happen. This was in 2006 when the internet actually existed, but walkthroughs just weren't up within 5 minutes of a game's release date. You think I could have actually found out about the Celadon City Goose Chase even if I did block the house from getting phone calls? I mean, Google didn't even exist back then. What was I supposed to do? Ask some dickhead in the chat room? They were probably too busy trying to diddle me at the time. The only other option I had in the moment when I tried it was probably to watch the edited TV version of Con Air with commercials or something like that, so you might as well just go on a wild goose chase, you know? So yeah, I'm not gonna romanticize every aspect of fully immersing yourself into a video game, because if I get the time spent on talking to an NPC in Pokemon back, I absolutely would. Who am I kidding? Not only wasted it anyway, but still though, being able to look into things is definitely a huge benefit. After the initial online era that give you access to reviews and outrageously long text-only walkthroughs though, there was the era that actually saw consoles themselves using the internet. Of all things, the Sega Genesis tried something similar all the way back in 1994 with the Sega Channel that let you temporarily download games through a cable wire. While this was amazing for the time, you'd lose the games as soon as you'd shut your console off since the Genesis had no internal memory. PCs let you fully download games for longer than consoles, but after cable modems became more common in the early 2000s, consoles would eventually catch up, with the Xbox 360 paving the way with one of the biggest game changers being that you could actually download games without ever having to go to the store. I know other consoles probably did it first, but the Xbox 360 was the first one people actually played, so just, you know, bear with me here. Downloading games to your console may not be that big of a deal now, but this was actually huge at the time, because now it was possible for smaller scale games like Super Meat Boy to have a chance to shine and resurrect dead genres that still had demand. I mean, if you were going to release a full retail game, then it wasn't really worth it to put anything out for cheaper than like $50, so relatively short and simplistic games like 2D platformers just weren't going to cut it. Thanks to digital downloads though, people could pretty much make any kind of game they want, no matter how big or little it is. Not only that, but this also gave older games a chance to shine with a simple download, as opposed to putting something like Kid Icarus onto a Blu-ray. And Nintendo really went to town with releasing older games on the Wii, which contributed to the retro scene exploding in popularity, but while the above-average sized end still doesn't really get the internet to this day, I still appreciate their early attempts at implementing the internet with a game console, when it was really more acceptable to not completely get it yet. I mean, hell, who didn't love the Everybody Votes channel, am I right? Can the Switch tell you the weather? I don't think so. Downloading games does have its drawbacks, though. For one, you can never let anybody borrow them, and if you don't like something you downloaded, then good luck trying to get a refund, and oh yeah, it's impossible to sell it, too. But even so, having digital as an option is certainly better than only having physical, so this can only really be seen as a plus any way you look at it. Not only did this whole internet gimmick let you download games, but now you can actually play these games with other human beings from anywhere in the world without having to crowd around one TV and share the same screen. And best part of all, you didn't even have to know these people either. I mean, some games like Mario Party really are better to play with others in the same room, but for the most part, it kind of ruins things when people can just cheat by looking at your screen. I mean, even if you're not trying to, it's hard not to take a peek, and on top of that, sacrificing 3/4 of a screen just makes things more of a hassle for everybody. Randomly generated maps would be a great solution to this, but that wasn't really a thing until after the internet already took off. Although, if split screens really chapped your ass, then it is worth mentioning that you could have always had a LAN party where everybody'd bring their own consoles, usually the original Xbox, and connect with each other locally. I'm not gonna lie, when I first heard about this, I remember laughing out loud at the idea of a bunch of people bringing multiple consoles and TVs together just to do multiplayer, but then in the very next breath I said, damn, I bet that's actually a lot of fun. LAN parties do still exist to this day for what I'd imagine is the camaraderie and or Wi-Fi allergies, but it wasn't too long after the popularity of these took off that the online gaming we're used to would really explode. So yeah, I tend to think that online multiplayer is way better than sharing a split screen with 3 other people, assuming everybody's got a solid internet connection anyway. But even if the lag and delays really do steam your clams, then split screens and LAN parties are still on the table, so again, there's really no arguing that things aren't better now as far as that's concerned. And even if you absolutely refuse to pay for an online service, you could still use the internet to meet way more people for local play than you ever could have before the internet, and even if you're only interested in playing with people you already met to avoid crazies from Craigslist, more people can find conventions and things of that nature thanks to the awareness raised over the internet, hence why conventions are way more popular now than ever before. Plus, with your only means of competitive gaming being limited to local get-togethers, it's easy for decent players to get a big head and assume they're way better than they actually are, and even without actually playing against other people online, just having access to videos and tournaments is enough to let you know where you stand. Personally, I never really got too competitive about games. Like, I try my absolute best when I'm playing, but once it's over, I move on with my day. Still though, it is a huge part of gaming, and it's undeniable that this aspect's way better now, especially since, again, all the old methods are still options on top of all the new ones. And since we're on such a roll with the pros in the internet and gaming, it's also pretty cool that your 8,000 hour save file for Ryan's Racing won't be completely lost if something happens to your Xbox thanks to the backups that are kept online. Before the internet was a thing, you'd usually only get like 3 save files and just kinda hope that nothing happened to your cartridge or memory card, and to be fair, it wasn't that hard to take care of things, but I'm sure we all have a horror story or two about losing save data.
So yeah, even though the good old information superhighway may have enabled a few developers to release unfinished games, I blame that problem more on the average gamer who doesn't seem to care, but that's pretty much everybody but me, so I guess it's my problem. Even though there's a big part of me that's always gonna miscut myself off from the outside world to fully immerse myself into a game despite the risk of having an aneurysm, I can't deny that the pros of the internet and gaming don't far outweigh the cons. I just think that there's a few cons that are worth mentioning is all. Anyway, that's all for today, but if you got a kick out of my incoherent rambling and disturbing imagery though, then you should check out this video I made featuring Chris Hansen about the time Persona 3 let you date a 10-year-old, but if you'll excuse me though, I gotta go shave this real mustache off. Later!
Turn it off!